All right, so when you look at a panel, can somebody throw me any one of those? Just toss me a globe. Yep, pick globe at random. So here we go. Lovely. Woo! Okay, that's okay. I'm going to be putting these all on those lights. It's all good. Okay, now the globe has evolved. This is the third or fourth semester I've done it. So every semester it evolves a little more. So if you look at the globe, it is designed to get you thinking about your book in relationship to the basics of the novel's form, character, plot, setting, right? And then it's also designed to get you thinking about your connection to the book, right? Because identity is one of the major themes of this course. So the major themes of this course have been identity, social action, like people trying to change the world, and people who have tried to change the world, right? And social criticism, people being critical of the world. And so, depending on your book, this is designed for you to explore your book in all three ways or three forms, right? So that you can make a good decision about how to and what you want to write the final essay on. So I'm going to go through a few things. So if you look at panel number, I think it's number 10. This is the triangle one with the white supremacy, right? So panel 10, panel 9, the one with the 3 circles, systems of oppression, those are about social criticism, right? Like that's about critiquing the society that your novel is in. And that fits with that theme. If those are really easy for you to do on your globe, that's a clue that that might be what you want to write about when you go to do your essay, right? If there wasn't a lot of that, then that's probably not an area you want to get into. However, if you look at some of the character ones, so like the character one where you have the emojis and the themes. So if you were looking at your reactions to the plot, right? And then you're looking at like the setting, that's more of social, that's just how society affects the plot or the individual, okay? So that can be more along the individual side. Now this person has, so this person has a bunch of different things about the characters. They had a leitmotif, because in this book there was a very specific leitmotif. And to Mariatu, palm oil symbolizes blood and death. Mangoes are a symbol of resilience to her because it's the first food she could eat after her hands were cut off. This by the way, is a great book, but very depressing, The Bite of the Mango, okay? And this woman survives a civil war and getting her hands cut off and all kinds of stuff. So a lot of the things that this person didn't quite fit in with a lot of the character stuff. She has no hands and she's illiterate. She couldn't do the I'm writing a character letter thing. Like it wouldn't make sense, right? So instead of that, she did a whole thing on like infographic. She did an infographic on what was going on with that particular war. If you think about the character things, you're comparing your character to yourself in the T-chart, right? You have the character letter, dear so-and-so, to another character, or else a character journal entry. If you're finding that you relate more to those panels and those panels are easier for you, then you should probably choose to do an essay that is more comparing yourself to a character. And that essay would be about individual identity and how identity is formed, which is one of the themes of the piece. So if you think about social activism, right, that's where the panels that we have that are kind of like, well, social activism is basically, you look at the plot points. Was your character a mover of the plot? What I mean is, some of these books, the characters are reacting to events, and some of these books, the characters are causing events. Like an event happens and then they cause a change. They have huge power. It's a question of power, right? Some characters don't have power over anything other than themselves, and sometimes they don't even have power over their own body. And sometimes characters in some of your books become like criminal underworld. Like there's some books that people are reading where somebody was like, had no power, and then they become the CEO of a large corporation after like murdering the guy who owned it and impersonating him, right? Like, so it has to be very general. So this is what I mean when I talk about the 4 kind of like areas, okay? So area number 1, oh, of course, every time, right? Guess what I want as a present when I retire? Just kidding. Of course I run out, right? Okay, so area number 1 corresponds to issues of identity. Area number 2 corresponds to social criticism, or being part of a group that is socially criticized. That's when we talk about representation. That's when we talk about, like, if you look at blackout, right? Like that's part of whole representation. So social criticism, I'm probably spelling this wrong because I'm tired. Okay? And social criticism and social activism are very closely related and kind of intertwined with each other. And then number 4 is more to do with the emojis thing. So the emoji thing, the idea about it is that you're supposed to have emojis, and these guys weren't doing it because they verbally told me. They didn't write it down. They told me in the book, like I did an interview with them, but I don't have time this year. So in the book, when this happened, I felt this, right? So you correspond the plot to this, and then an emoji for like the overall feeling about the book. If you had very, very strong feelings negatively or positively about your book, right? And then you had a corresponding very strong feeling negatively or positively about something we covered in class, that is when you might want to do the I hate it, I hate this book essay. That's what I call it. Blah, blah, blah essay. That is a persuasive essay. Now, not many people do this. I had 3 people do this last semester. I have had people do this, and it has made me change my mind. I've had people write essays why I shouldn't teach Hamlet, and I quit teaching Hamlet for like 3 years. Why I should never teach Romeo and Juliet, because it's just a couple of teenage suicides and it's re-traumatizing all my students. Haven't taught it since. Like, you know, if you are not feeling a connection to these things, fine. But don't think that this is the easiest. This is actually a hard one. If you say, I believe that this book, so last semester somebody thought that their book, we should read it instead of Animal Farm. Actually, a bunch of them wrote things about Animal Farm. So she actually went through and she went to the Saskatchewan curriculum for this class, and she listed all of the curriculum outcomes that her book would fit just as well as Animal Farm, and made a really good argument. So this is not the easy one to do. People think it is, and it is if you like to argue and you want to look up your stuff, but you got to back that up. So this one, in terms of text evidence, you are using a text, and then you are going plus the SAS curriculum. Like, you actually have to use the SAS curriculum if you do that. For social activism and for social criticism, these are so intertwined that they usually end up being one type of essay, and I'll get to that in a sec. For identity, you're basically doing the same compare and contrast kind of essay that you did with Hassan Minhaj, right? Oh, I just found yours, and I'll hand it back to you. Sorry, you got like a 98 or something. It's ridiculous. So, identity is me versus, character in the book. And it's so tied in with like how you would react in that situation as opposed to them. And what makes you so different, right? Or so similar. So that's very much, if you were very comfortable writing that essay, that might be the kind of essay that you want to do here. However, you have to add one thing in. You can't just be about you and the character plus something from the course. So if you said, me and this character and Hassan Minhaj all have these things in common and these things different, that's your essay. And the character, the third one, has got to be from something we studied in class. It can be from an author, like somebody like Langston Hughes, right? Or it could be like any of the characters in Blackout, like any of them, right? And the point is that you have to have evidence to back it up. For these two, for social criticism, this is where you can kind of go in and you can say, okay, like this is when you're actually critiquing how the characters and how the author chooses plot points within the structures that are in the book. So, social criticism in terms of this novel means if your book doesn't even mention race, then it's firmly on the bottom of this triangle. It's in the indifferent zone, right? So now you can write a critical article, basically, saying, I think this book is a good book, but it shouldn't be studied as an example of like anything important because it doesn't even address white supremacy. And so it actually contributes to it because it doesn't actually, it assumes that white is normal, right? And you would be critiquing it. And then you would have evidence to back up what you're saying about the book. That's a straight up literary essay. You're making a thesis about your book and you're saying this, right? And then you're finding evidence in the book. You're specifically talking about the book. However, then you contrast it with something we already saw. So when you look at Blackout, they specifically set out just to write love stories. They didn't set out to write stories about white supremacy or anything. They just wanted to be simple, right? So then you can contrast that with, if you look at Mask Off, there is this, he doesn't even mention whiteness once, right? Because he's more concerned with the homophobia. And you can talk about how that is rooted in like this old patriarchal idea. You can really get into it. It's really more like a sociology thing. But if you're doing any of these, you're critiquing your book in contrast with or comparing it to something we already covered in class. Because this is the whole point of this being a final. You have an individual novel, all of your novels are different, but you all took the same things, right? So when you go and do that forms lesson and I'm like, is there love? Check this. You should be comparing to Blackout. If there's a love story, you should be looking at Blackout, right? If there's like, you know, if this thing happens, you should be looking at Langston Hughes. If this thing happens, you should be looking at that. That's what today and tomorrow are about. I am here to help you try and find those connections. This is the pre-write, okay? Now, when you look at social activism, who in your book is like one of the activists we looked at? That's kind of the difference. So when you look at Langston Hughes, if you look at Baldwin, right, they're activists, straight up activists. Is there a character in your book that you can think of right now? And it doesn't have to be activists for black rights, it could be for gay rights, it could be for ableism, it could be like, is there a character in your book who is a spokesperson for a community under fire, right? And that's where this thing I just handed you came in. So if there are examples in your book that to you, if there are examples in your book that to you are very clearly about systemic oppression, and then there are characters in your book who are very clearly against that, like there's that whole transformation happening, then this is where you want to be for your essay. You want to be comparing their activism with that of activists that we've looked at. And it can include activists that you already looked at in your own essays. Some of you wrote essays and included references to Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or whatever, right? Or in your research you did. You can incorporate those in. You can compare the activism of the characters in your book to the activism that we saw Remember we were watching Ketanji Brown Jackson and how Ted Cruz, remember how we were watching that live ridiculousness when they were like trying to confirm the first black Supreme Justice of the United States and the garbage questions she was getting? Like, and she's like the first. If you have a character in your book who is the first and who is under fire because of this, systemic oppression and is the curse breaker of their generation, like generational curses, it's hard to be the person who's breaking it, right? That is completely a reference you can do. We covered Ketanji Brown Jackson extensively. We looked at all those racist commercials. Remember that really horrible one with the soap?
Okay, yeah.
I mean, we were laughing, but that was, and that's rooted directly in white supremacy and colonialism, right? And so it really depends on your book. That's why when people say, what am I writing? I'm like, that's why you do the pre-write first.